Now, if no one objects, I thought I might make a curry. A good old Dr. Curled Shipman at your servissimo. With, of course, the Condoleezza rice. Okay.
Good morning, Vietnam! I love the smell of napalm in the morning.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
I feel speed.
Roads? No, we don't need roads. Snakes. Why'd it have to be snakes?
I'm Spartacus!
I'm Batman. I am the Father.
Hello and welcome to the latest Moviescramble podcast. In this episode, we are treating you to a double dose of water-based films. One is cute, romantic and speaks to your soul. The other is disorientating, violent and ever so slightly mental. Kind of the perfect way to describe John and me. So, and as you can guess by that laughter, I am joined by John today. So John, how are you?
Yes, very much water-based. I think we're both of us are basically sentient cucumbers, I think, aren't we, at this stage in our lives?
It's the nicest thing anyone's ever called me.
Yes. Yeah, I'm all right. It's been a nice wee couple of weeks with the lack of rain, and I've managed to, even with all the good weather, still managed to be watching lots and lots of good stuff, and looking forward to what is now pretty much the start of the summer movie season as well.
Yay.
So yeah, all good. What about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm at the time of recording heavily sunburned, but no doubt by the time you're listening to this, it'll be back to raining sideways, good old Scottish summer. But right now, looking a bit like a drumstick squashy. So on today's episode, we are talking about The Ballad of Wallis Island, directed by James Griffiths, and The Surfer, directed by Lorcan Finnegan. So I thought we'd start off by talking about The Ballad of Wallis Island, because I feel like we need to build up to The Surfer.
Mm-hmm.
You made it, okay?
Is there not like a harbour?
It's sort of nature's harbour.
Welcome to Wallis Island.
No.
Do you sell rice? My phone got wet.
We've got pasta.
Has to be rice, apparently. Oh, you've got rice pudding, look. Rice pudding definitely won't work.
Well, not with that attitude. No, it won't.
So the film centres around Herb Maguire, played by Tom Basden, and he used to make music that moved people back when he performed in a duo with Nell Mortimer, played by Katie Mulligan. His solo career is seriously in need of some funds, and Nell has given it all up to make chutney. So when Charles Heath, played by Tim P, offers the pair hundreds of thousands of pounds to perform a gig on Wallis Island, both accept unquestioningly. But the days spent on this remote Welsh island have a transformational effect on all involved. This was the surprise film at the Glasgow Film Festival this year, so I saw this a little while back. But John, did you know much about it going into it?
I did not really know anything about the film going into it. Obviously, I think you did the review for this, for the site.
Yes.
I did read it at the time, but I did then kind of forget about it because there was lots of reviews lots of very, very good reviews he did. People go to the Moviescramble.co.uk site to read all of Mary's coverage of the film festival, which was excellent. So I did not really know very much about it. Expectations were pretty much nil on it because I had no idea that the title intrigued me because the title did sound as if it was a song. So I was kind of, oh, right, this could be very good or this could be very bad. But yes, I didn't know anything about it, but the pedigree of the people who were in it kind of intrigued me. So yes, interesting.
Yeah, no, I definitely didn't know anything about it. As I say, when it came on, it was the surprise film, and I was bottom lip trembling quite a lot, a little bit of blubbering, and it was good to actually watch it with an audience who were obviously super engaged. I think it's a film that it goes heavy into sort of nostalgia and grief and how you sort of cope through music, and I found that a really intriguing premise because it has been done before, but I feel like this had like a uniquely sort of British sense of humour about it. Would you agree with that?
Very much so. The character of Charles with his no pun uncovered. Yes, there's an awful lot of humour here, and especially that character. But yes, that obviously masks a multitude of things that are going on in the background as well. So yes, yeah, I thought that was pretty good. Yeah, what about yourself?
Yeah, no, I still to this day will never forget the joke that he makes when he's making curry and he's like Dr. Harold Shipman, and obviously that's a really British joke as well. Like you have to know who Harold Shipman is to get that. But I think that it's sort of it's this nice blend of, as I say, sort of nostalgia, but also it's not afraid to get into the sort of like the messier parts of like grief and loneliness as well. And obviously music plays a huge part in that journey. So what did you think of the music within the film? Because obviously we have Herb and Nell, who used to be a sort of like folk music partnership, and that's all sort of gone to pot. What did you think of their sort of moments together when they were singing?
I thought it was absolutely wonderful because they were very much in sync, and you could tell that they'd had a past together which informed their music, and they were very at ease with each other when they were playing music. And they were going through like a rehearsal period and everything to basically relearn songs. And at one point Herb was having real problems actually playing one of the songs that he wrote because he hadn't played it for such a long time. And it was just really sort of it fitted really, really well, which is a strange thing to say about a film that is kind of itself a bit of a folk song as well.
Yeah.
The way the beats of the film play out in such a way that it's like element. You could easily see this being sort of put to music in a 4 or 5 minute song about, because it's like the whole ballad of it and everything. But yeah, the chemistry between them during those scenes was just fantastic because it felt genuine. It felt like it was two people who had a musical past, and they sort of came to life a wee bit more when they were with each other playing the music, and all the stuff that was surrounding them, all their previous encounters and why they're no longer a duo, all that was kind of put to the side because it was just purely doing the music, and it kind of came through really well. And the songs were like really nice as well. And you could obviously tell that each song had a wee story behind it, and part of that story actually came through in some of the lyrics and everything as well. But yeah, I thought it was excellent. It's really good.
Yeah, I do love the scene where they first start singing together, like sort of around the dinner table, and Charles's face lights up because obviously this is like a personal concert for him, but it's the two of them, just the way they sort of like sit with each other, like physically, as well as when they sort of actually go into the harmonies. You're like, oh, this is two people who, fit together really well, like in terms of their intuition for playing music and creating music together. And I think that this notion that all of the characters are bringing their past to the table, quite literally, is really interesting. Because obviously there's a sort of theme of sort of memory and loss going throughout it. How did you feel that sort of played out in the sort of initial introductions to the characters versus how they sort of progress through the film, this notion that everyone has a past, essentially?
Well, the opening scene of the film kind of sets up both Charles and Herb, because Herb is coming to the island and he's in this wee boat, but it's still looking a bit like a star, wearing the shades and all that, and a bit unruffled, he's just still sort of a bit unkempt and everything. So it's like almost like he's just come off of a bender and he's just like getting out in this boat into this island. So there's the way that he is introduced as the rock star almost. I know it's like he's a folk star, but it's that kind of look that he's got about him, because that's part of why he's actually in the position he's in. He's trying to do different things with his music and all that. And then you have the opposite of that in Charles, who is very eccentric. You can tell he's eccentric without him actually saying a word or really doing anything.
100%.
You get the feeling that this is a guy that he jokes about, he makes light of everything. He always has to talk, always. And you get when those two come together, and there's a scene here, obviously. It's interesting because the island they're on doesn't have a harbour at all. So it's basically just have to go up to as close to the beach as they can get, and everybody's going to get wet when they come off the boat. And he obviously, Herb gets very wet because he falls in the water due to comic situation. And that wee scene there just sets out how both of them are actually as people, and how they are at odds with each other right away. But there's a need on both sides. One is Herb needs the money, and Charles needs Herb to actually perform and do this intimate concert for him. So yeah, I thought that it was very nicely done, because it could have been done in a number of different ways, accenting one or the other and playing their roles up a wee bit, but it left the rest of the story for that to kind of develop and to bring in their pasts, and it felt natural then because of that wee introduction to them. It gave you enough insight into the people that they were, that you were saying, I want to learn more about these people. I want to understand how they got to this point in their lives. And it's not spoon-fed to you. There's just wee things that are introduced. There is a wee bit of exposition at some points, which every film has, let's face it. But yes, it wasn't sort of forced onto in the first couple of minutes to get it out of the way so they could do lots of comic-y things or anything like that. So yeah, I thought it was very nicely done, very subtle.
Yeah, and I think when they bring Nell into it as well, like she is really vivacious and full of life, whereas you see Herb is looking like really jaded and sort of desperate to cling on to like parts of his career and his fame, whereas Nell, she's married, she seems at peace with her life, she's making chutney, she just seems to be really content, and I think that her disposition is really clear from the offset as well, even by the way that she gets out of the boat and comes up the island as well. There's no big dramas. It's kind of like, it's almost like it's a fun adventure for her, whereas Herb, obviously, I do really like though that when obviously Herb falls into the water, that leads to the notion that he has to get his phone and rice, which is an ongoing joke that goes throughout the film as well, and introduces us to the sort of shopkeeper character, and she obviously never has anything in stock, like doesn't know what they're talking about. I love that scene where she was like, oh, well, would pasta do? And he's like, oh, apparently it has to be rice. Like, and they're all making fun of him as if he's this big diva and not somebody who's just face planked like in the sea. So I really, really like that. And I think it sets up the characters really nicely in terms of we get a clear understanding of who they are. I'm not saying they're like stereotypes, but they are marked out very clearly as to perhaps maybe where they've come from. But I also think that the film uses these sort of three key characters and the music as a sort of bridge to seeing what the future might look like as well. And I'm thinking in particular the scene where they light the lanterns on the beach, and it's like you've obviously to make a wish for your future. And I thought the dynamic of the three of them on that scene was really interesting, and it showed you quite clearly who had a strong sense of self and what they wanted from life. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, it was even quite subtly done in terms of how they were actually positioned. You had Charles in the middle of them, so they weren't even like side by side when they were doing that, and it did kind of indicate that they were both wanting something that would be fulfilling for them, but they weren't quite sure what that was going to be. Obviously, Herb, giving away sort of now spoilers film, he was looking to get a musical relationship and possibly another relationship back with Nell, but that wasn't going to happen at all because, like say, Nell is a more sort of settled character. But even then, I mean, by saying that, she still had her problems and her issues. I mean, one of the problems was she was broke. She didn't have any money, so therefore she needed to be on that island as much as Herb did. And you could tell that there was a certain amount of anxiety about Nell because she wasn't fulfilled in what she was doing. She enjoyed what she was doing, but there was scenes in the film where she'd be writing away in a book, and that was obviously she was working on musical ideas and lyrics and things like that, but she wasn't sharing that with anybody, and that didn't really come to anything as part of the film. But that was just one of these things, like you say, looking towards her future, I think. So yes, it was good. Obviously with Charles in the middle as well, I don't know if he actually thought he had really much of a future because he was kind of stuck in this rut. He'd been there for 5 years, I think it was, on the island. So, and he obviously hadn't progressed in any way. It was almost like a holding pattern that he was in for that length of time. And I think he obviously decided he had to do something about it. And this was like part of maybe his own sort of self-rehabilitation, but I was never really, it was hinted at, but it was never really sort of gone into in any great detail, which is, again, a good thing. Keeps you engaged, keeps you thinking about the characters.
And I definitely think the performances really helped drive this, because it's quite a small film in some ways, even though, like, obviously it's well-known names in the cast, but it's got a kind of small feel to it. I think, obviously, you know, you've got Tim Key as Charles, who, as you say, just doesn't shut up, like, at all, even though, like, as I say, they're trying to admire the sunset, and Herb's like, just stop talking. He's like, yep, I will just stop talking. Like, he can't even just do that. But I think his performance is quite, it's complex enough. There's nuance enough to it. So in terms of like, how did you find that performance? You've obviously got Carey Mulligan and I'm going to say the wrong name. Tom Basden. I was going to say Tim Basden. Tom Basden as well. What did you think of the sort of three kind of leading performances in the film?
Well, they were all really good because there was no performance that kind of outshone the other. So it was a real sort of three-hander, and there was plenty of room within the script to allow them all to have like their own moments and obviously shine and come through. I mean, you're talking, I mean, Carey Mulligan, for goodness sakes.
I know, such a huge name. I know.
Yeah, that's it. We see that sort of trend with certain actors. They'll do almost like one for them, one for me kind of idea. And they'll do these very small films basically because their name gets the films made, which is more, you can't really have that if you've got an actor who maybe television actor, because Tim Key and I forgot the guy's name. Tom
Basden.
Yeah, they're both primarily TV actors, which is not a bad thing. Obviously, TV is as big as film these days, and it's mostly comedy stuff that they're involved in. So in order to get the money to get a film off the ground is a big deal. And I know it was like Baby Cow Productions and all that, and they do a lot of those sort of smaller things, but even then it's a difficult sell without having a name attached to it. So yeah, she was excellent. I thought she played it very straight, and she was very engaging but not overpowering in a way that you would think a named actor could possibly be. Kind of take like chewing the scenery. We've mentioned that a few times with certain actors, yes. But the key performance in here is definitely the performance of Charles, because he's central to everything, and he's a man who doesn't like silences in any way. You can see when he's sitting in his own right at the very start, he's sitting looking at the clock because he knows what time the boat comes in. And it's quiet because there's nobody else in the house, and you can tell that he hates that because he's got nobody to play off against and do his puns and not stop talking at any time, because it's just this constant thing. And it's fast and it's clever the way that he does it, because his comeback lines for something that's said to him by, say, Herb is immediate. He doesn't even think about it. It's just as if it's completely natural. And it's almost as if he's been building these things up for years and years. He's storing all these stupid puns, and he's getting a chance to actually say them now while these people are actually around him. And he's in his element, and you can see he's in his element, but there's obviously like a total undercurrent of sadness about his whole life, and that comes through in the performance as well. And it's mostly done in a visual way rather than in a storytelling way. It's done by his expressions more than anything else. He's almost got this wounded puppy look about him.
100. He's got really sad eyes, because I mean, I think it would be very easy for Charles to become a character who was just annoying because of the constant sort of verbal like back and forth. But actually the fact that, he does have this sort of pathos to him, and there is moments where, his eyes are sort of filling to the brim and you're going as well, because how dare you make this sort of joyous bundle of fun upset? And I think that definitely gives the character the sort of nuance that it needs to stop him becoming basically just annoying. But of course, there's a lovely sort of visual metaphor for that, where he's playing tennis, where he's like, I only know how to serve one way because I've only ever played by myself. And that's like his monologues, or whatever you want to call them, his dialogue does seem very like one person centered, just because he's so used to being by himself. But I think you're right. I think Carey Mulligan's, her performance as Nell, again, although we maybe don't get the whole story, like you said, that she's constantly writing sort of maybe lyrics or whatever in her notebook, and we never really get the full story of where that's going. I think we get enough of her to know that there is a part of her that's sort of nostalgic and wistful for that kind of partnership that her and Herb once had, the life on the road, the performances, the crowds, and that actually she's a little bit of a sort of, I don't want to say a romantic, because obviously she makes it really clear to Herb that she's not here to get back with him like in a relationship way. But you also can tell that she's sort of gently encouraging Charles and the shopkeeper, played by Shan Clifford, Fleabag's sister, for anyone that watches that. She sort of kind of pushes them into a wee sort of romance as well. And I thought that was really nice, because, again, it could have gone down the route of the cliched, like, Nell and Herb get back together, but actually it takes us off in a sort of different romantic direction. Did you quite like that?
Yeah, that was a wee bit of a surprise because not giving away the end, I kind of thought they could have gone in one direction for the end of it, where both Herb and Neil get back together. And like I say, that doesn't happen. They go in a different route, and it's a gentler route, and it's more interesting actually than the sort of the standard ending that you kind of expect from these films, because you've actually got two people who are almost, they both seem to be sort of wounded. But you don't really get very much of the shopkeeper's backstory at all. It's just she has a son and she's there on this island with very few other people. And, like, why is she there? What's her past been? And that's never really discussed. And you can tell that she's one of these people who likes the company of others, and she's very open, and she's obviously very generous as well, because even though Charles makes all these stupid remarks around her just to fill in the silences, she never rolls her eyes or anything. Not the same way. Almost constantly is just looking at him and going, Jesus, can you not just shut up for a minute? But he never does that. So it makes that more interesting in terms of them actually forming some sort of relationship, because you don't really think that's going to happen at all. You just think that she's this sort of weird wee shopkeeper character
who never had any stock.
Yeah, it could have been like pretty one-dimensional, that whole role, but they kind of, it was elevated a wee bit and brought in a wee bit more. You can see why they would do that as well, because it gives an extra story into the film, and it gives a bit of relief from this quite intense at times three-hander that they have. So yes, it was nice. It was a good wee sort of aside more than anything else.
I really like that as well. And I think the fact that even just that it's set on an island, I think is really important, because that's when you do get these kind of quirkier characters, because it's not like set in a big city. It's these kind of maybe like eccentric sort of small town kind of feel to it. And obviously there's a sense of it's not necessarily cut off, but the boat only comes and goes at certain times, so there is a kind of isolation to it. Would you say that was quite important then, the fact that it does have this really quite striking setting?
Oh, definitely, because it sets up the fact that you've got people there who have nobody else to talk to, no other means of communication. Like, Charles doesn't have a landline.
There's like one phone booth in the village.
Phone booth, and that's used to very good effect as well, because Nell encourages Charles to maybe ask her out, and he says, well, I don't think it would really work, because I would need to go down, I'd need to go past the shop to the phone booth to actually give her a call. And it's very cleverly done at the start with the mobile phone falling into the water and not being usable, because then you have a way of isolating Herb from the outside world. And it also means that there's a whole sort of comic element that follows that all the way through, because it has to use a payphone and he doesn't have change. So therefore Charles goes and gets some change, and it's a £50 note, and somehow he manages to change all of it. And it's just this bag of coins that he constantly has. So whenever the bag of rice arrives, he just opens up the bag and the bag of money and says, look, just take what you need from that. And she picks up like £2 or something, £2 worth of 20p coins. It's very subtle, but it's really, really clever the way they did that. And isolation made for people eventually open up a bit more, because you run out of just sort of niceties and small talk, and they're there for a specific reason as well, so it kind of concentrates all of that into that as well. And I thought that was nice, because obviously Nell's husband was there with her, but they got rid of him, or he got rid of himself.
They sent him packing.
He was away, so it meant that the isolation was still there with just the three of them more than anything else. I thought, that worked very nicely indeed.
And then, of course, that gives us like really gorgeous cinematography as well. Like, there are scenes like on the beach at night time. Even in the island when it's like lashing rain, there's something sort of vaguely romantic and, as I say, sort of uniquely British about it, because only we would put up with that terrible weather and find some sort of reason to be happy in it. What did you think of that kind of element of the film as well? Because I do think it luxuriates a little bit in the setting. It's not just here's this island full of quirky characters. I think it does kind of showcase the scenery a little bit as well.
Yeah, it's at pains to point out that there's some very nice scenes in the film that they make full use of. So there's like maybe 3 or 4 different scenes on the beach, some of them involving like Herb going into the water, for instance, and the usual misunderstandings and sort of the scale of the place as well, because Herb at one point goes into the water and Charles is up in the cliffs behind him and he's shouting at him and they can't hear him because it's so far away and all this sort of stuff. It makes very good use of the scenery, and it incorporates it into the story as well, and it sort of emphasises, like we were talking about in terms of the isolation as well, the fact that it is an island and there's very little actually on the island. People don't drive, for instance. There doesn't seem to be very much driving. Obviously Charles doesn't drive, but there are tours that go away to the other side of the island and all this sort of stuff. But it is very much this, it could in different hands been seen as being this sort of wee idyllic sort of getaway kind of place. But yeah, you're right, it's integral to the actual story, the fact that it's such a beautiful place that they're on, and yet all these people have all these conflicts and sort of inner turmoils, while outside it's lovely seascapes and everything for them to see. And I would say that it was very, very important to it.
Yeah, and I think sort of conversely to sort of that kind of lovely sort of British life, there's an undercurrent of like maybe like financial sort of storylines going on. Like I do love when they show you Herb's new album cover mock-up, because it is so awful. And that sounds like a really funny storyline in itself, and that's obviously why Herb is on the island, because he needs the money to make the album. But how did you feel that played into it? Because I didn't guess like where the sort of money was coming from, or Charles's kind of storyline. But I feel like that's a very un-British thing to do, is to talk about money, and yet it's ever present, even right down to, as I was going to mention, the bag of £50 note that's been changed into 20p pieces. It's a really sort of present part of the film, because even with Nell and her life, she's not making obviously the same money that she was when she was a star. Like I didn't guess Charles's sort of storyline, as it were, as I said. What did you think of that sort of playing into, as I say, this kind of otherwise quite quirky and eccentric island?
It sort of added an extra element to it, I would say, and it was unexpected because they weren't focusing on the money. It could, because both of the musicians in this were sort of past their former glories, you were kind of thinking it wouldn't be a great amount of money that they were talking about that they would actually be getting here, because people play for an awful lot less than they were actually offering. I mean, it was what, 500,000 and 300,000 that they were getting, which is an awful lot of money to do a single concert. It's kind of Arab Sheikh kind of levels of, like Beyonce going and playing, getting £1 million to play like a gig, that kind of thing. So yes, it was always present, but yes, there was a very sort of British sensibility about it. We don't talk about money kind of idea. And then when they did have the whole conversation about how he came to have the money, it was actually pretty funny as well. So, and again, it acted as both an explanation of how he was able to get him there, but it was also an explanation of how Charles had actually ended up in the island as well, which I found it was very cleverly done, I thought. Yeah,
no, definitely. So I think this is a film that's based on Tim Key and Tom Basden's short film that they made, and sometimes I think that doesn't quite work when you try and take a film that's maybe like say 30 minutes or less and stretch it out into like maybe like a 90-minute runtime or whatever it is. But I felt the pacing was great in this. I felt that as you say, it hit a lot of points almost like a folk song in itself. So you kind of maybe knew where it was headed, but it definitely kept my attention right up until the end. Would you agree with that? Yeah,
I would say so. I haven't seen the short film, and there are only 2 characters in the short film, so it was obviously much smaller scale. So what they've done here is they've expanded it to obviously include the character of Nell, and then obviously the shopkeeper, and added a bit more flavour to it with the background to Charles and how he has so much money and all this sort of stuff. So I felt that the whole film you could probably describe as being gentle. There wasn't.
Yeah.
There was no sort of fast-paced stuff in it at all, which is fine. You don't need that in every film. You just need to be engaged with the film to actually enjoy it. So the pacing of it, yeah, worked really, really well. Like I say, it's like a folk song, because if you actually sat down with a copy of the script, you could divide it into the various verses of a 5-minute folk song about the arrival, the introduction, the second introduction, how they're going on together, the conflict, and then the end. And you could have like a nice wee song out of that. So it kind of works in that way. So that's one reason why I think it's called the Ballad of Wallis Island, because it almost could be interpreted as a song. And because of that structure, it works particularly well. There are no extra bits in it that would kind of take you away from it. There's no overtly, stupidly comic bits in it as well. It's all kind of natural. Every single character in it, you can think, yeah, I've met somebody. Like, I've met a Charles in my life. I definitely have. I've met somebody who, at least one person who wouldn't stop talking, and they're always talking in these like sort of puns.
I mean, it's rude that you're talking about me right now.
Yeah, I wasn't going to mention that, but so yes, I thought it worked very well in that sort of regard.
Yeah, it feels like familiar and cozy without being cliched. I think like there's something really heartwarming about it. I mean, I was blubbering during this. I don't know if you were a bit more stoic than I was, but this got to me a few times, because I think as well, because it does, obviously it's talking about grief and loss, and not just the loss of a person, but the loss of a way of life. So for Charles, obviously with his loss, he has lost both his wife and the experiences that they had together, because obviously they were big music lovers, they used to go to concerts together. But with Herb and Nell, it's the loss of a way of life. So nobody's, touring, nobody's queuing up to get their autograph anymore. So I did feel there was a sort of a twinge of sadness that never quite went away, and that did set the old bottom lip trembling quite a few times.
I did like the explanation of why they split up when he accidentally recorded a solo album.
Yeah. I was going to ask you just there if there was a standout moment of the film, and I do think that has to be up there, the accidental recording of a solo album, because it's so, as you say, it's one of these things that the way it's described is absolutely, it's fantastic. But was there any other sort of moments that you thought, oh, this film they've got this so right?
It was a scene in the shop which followed Herb and Charles playing tennis, and there was the whole tennis thing, how he could only he served really well, but he couldn't return the serve and things like that. And then they went down to the shop, and they were like sort of like talking to the shopkeeper and everything. And Charles made a remark about the clothes that Herb was wearing, how ridiculous it looked. And obviously Herb turned around and says, "They're your clothes, mate." I just thought that was excellent. It was so. Anyway, fair enough. Yeah, I thought it was wonderful. I was just almost like a wee aside, but yes, I really liked that moment. I was really sort of laughing away at that. What about yourself? Or you've obviously got something in mind.
The Harold Shipman joke is like that actually brought the GFT to a complete standstill. Like, I've never heard people laugh so much in my life, but that was so good. But I also really like the part when Herb and Nell find out that they're getting paid different amounts. So it's like Charles has perpetuated the gender pay gap all over again, and it's like because she was obviously offered significantly less. So I did like the wee sort of debate around that, but I was a big fan of the sort of the quieter moments in the film, like even when they were just like playing music, especially around the dinner table and things like that. I really liked, and I also loved the scene where Charles is showing off like he's got a guitar, and Herb's like, "Oh, that's my original guitar," and he's just like got a jar of hair, and Nell's like, "Well, that's definitely not mine, so I don't know what you've paid for." And I really like this notion of kind of the obsessive fan who has the money to buy, basically whatever he wants, but she's quite convinced that that's not her hair in the jar.
Yeah, I mean, there was like another bit which ran right through the film, which was the tap in Herb's room was always on, and it just obviously just poured out water. And obviously Charles has spent a lot of money gathering memorabilia and albums and, like, say, hair and things like that, but he wasn't willing to actually get a tap fixed. It was very weird. It showed where his priorities were. He just didn't care about that because it was in a room that he probably didn't use all that often because it's a spare room in his big house. But yeah, I thought that was a nice wee touch as well. And they came back to it a couple of times when he was in his room, and they just sort of, they'd have like a maybe 2 or 3 second shot of the tap just running and then just move away and never really come to it. And it was one of these things that I thought it's going to play into it at some point, and that Herb's going to get really annoyed because his tap
and
is
rip
running
the
off.
thing
But
off
he
the wall or
yeah,
something.
and he
Yeah.
never does, because that wouldn't be fitting in with the sort of the whole British sensibility of the thing. It's very sort of buttoned down. Like you say, they're there to do a gig and sort of get themselves both out of financial holes that they're in.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't want to upset Charles in too much of a way. And yet it becomes increasingly more difficult because he is this eccentric loner type character, and you just don't know that at some point he may just snap. And
I know that there is like horror film elements to this, isn't there?
Yeah.
There's like
Mhm.
there is a kind of weird thing where this film could have gone like really nice and heartwarming, or guy goes absolutely nuts in an abandoned house sort of thing. It definitely has that vibe to it.
Yeah, no, you're right. I don't know if there was a horror version of this, but yeah, it would
There
probably
should
play
be.
quite nicely as well. Yeah.
So is there anything else in this film in particular that you want to pick up on? Is there anything that I've missed?
Just the music itself. I thought the music that actually featured in it was really sort of fitting to it, and the songs, you could tell that they had been developed quite carefully so that they fitted in very, very nicely indeed. And obviously there's a lot of on-screen guitar playing and singing. I particularly liked the fact that when they were singing together as a duo, Nell sort of naturally came in to the song. She didn't, obviously, you heard some of the recordings of various songs that they did on their albums, and the harmonies and the way that the vocals actually worked came in very quickly, and it was like sort of harmonies right from the start. But when Nell was singing, she would take the lead from Herb, and that she would come in maybe like 2 or 3 words after he'd actually started singing. And I thought that's very natural, because that's somebody who hasn't sung these songs for a long time. They're looking for like the way to get into it in terms of the key and everything, so that they're, you know, it felt very natural rather than being very polished and they knew exactly what they're doing. They're just sort of, it wasn't like just putting on like a set of clothes that you're very familiar with and you know how to hold yourself. It was a wee bit awkward, and they were sort of like getting to know each other again musically. And I thought, yeah, that was very, very well done. It was nice to see something like that. It's something that obviously been thought out in quite detail, I would say.
Yeah, and Katie Mulligan has a beautiful voice. Like I'd seen her singing in, is it Shame? Where she sings New York, New York. Yeah. And so I've only ever seen that, but I thought that her voice like was really perfect for that sort of folksy kind of, and the way they harmonized together, I thought was really lovely. And that's like even the scenes where they were sort of working things out in the wee sort of like conservatory area, and they were sort of getting things wrong, and the piano wasn't quite right, and it all, as you say, it wasn't like perfectly polished. It was 2 people who were sort of getting back into the swing of playing their own music again, and people's voices obviously change and things like that, and it worked really, really nicely, I thought. It
added so much to the film, I thought. So yes, and it's the kind of film I think that you could transplant it from the Welsh island to probably many other locations across the world, in terms of just isolated locations, and have the same sort of story play out in pretty much the same way, and it would work. You could even change your music styles and all sorts of things like that. So, but the core of the story would kind of carry it no matter where it was. Yeah,
I feel like the story was really strong, and as I say, the characterization really helped as well. As I say, I do think there's something quite British about this, so I'm interested that you said that you feel like you could transplant it to a lot of other places, because I feel like the humour is quite British, but nonetheless, I think a very sort of well-structured, sort of tight kind of film that's sort of really well put together and sort of bolstered by the performances. The film, I believe, is out on the 30th of May in UK cinemas, so would you recommend people go along and see it?
Oh, definitely. I mean, you're talking about a film that's 99 minutes long, so it's not going to be a burden to you in any way. It doesn't hang about. It does exactly what you'd think of doing sometimes, but there are some nice wee gentle surprises it's a very good way to spend just over an hour and a half of your time. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend it. I think if you're looking for something that's just the right side of schmaltz, with a little bit of romance, lots of humour, and, you know, really stunning scenery to look at, this is definitely worth seeking out, and obviously worth supporting sort of small British films like this as well, so that hopefully more can get made and into the cinemas as well, and not just sort of on the festival circuit. So definitely worth seeking out. For some tonal whiplash, we're now going to discuss Lorcan Finnegan's The Surfer.
You can't stop a wave. Born in a storm, way out to sea. Pure energy. And it's all building to this breaking point. I grew up here.
Dans les vies, dans ce vie.
Hey, Dad.
It's okay. You're scaring my boy.
Now. No need for all this fuss. Listen to me, brother. I know it's smarts to lose space in front of your boy, but you gotta know when to back down, or it could get a whole lot worse.
Here's a little bit of background or plot. Basically, Nick Cage plays the titular character called The Surfer, and he's there back in Australia with his son Finn, and they attempt to catch a wave or two on Lunar Bay, only to be told that because they don't live there, they can't surf there. So despite the fact that he grew up in the area, his American accent reveals that he is no longer a local. He's trying to re-establish a relationship with his son. He's even buying a house in the area so they can rekindle their bond. But he is faced with Scally, played by Julian McMahon, complete with mahogany tan and blinding white teeth, and cannot get to obviously use the beach in the way that he would like to. The Bay Boys are Scally's little group, and they protect this particular little patch of sand. From here, Lorcan Finnegan plunges us into a desperate, humiliating series of events that pushes the surfer to the brink of his very existence. Who else but Nicolas Cage could lead a film like this? So obviously, John, we've talked about Nick Cage films in detail when we were talking about Longlegs, and we sort of picked out our favourite performances. What kind of expectations were you therefore bringing to this film?
It's difficult, isn't it? You have a certain expectation with any Nicolas Cage film with regards to his extensive back catalogue and his well-publicised money issues, forcing him to basically take on every role that was offered to him, and the continuation from that, even after all that was kind of sorted. So there's a certain weight behind seeing starring Nicolas Cage on a poster or a trailer. So yes. But having said that, you don't really know what to expect with a Nick Cage film because he's done so many different types of films. He, like I said, because he was doing lots and lots of films, there is a whole variety of stuff in the last decade. So you've got no idea what level of crazy or sanity that you're actually going to get from his performance. So every time I go into these films, it's always Christmas Eve. I always get reasonably sort of warm expectations about it and looking forward to it. So I hadn't really seen, well, the trailers didn't really give very much away for it, which kind of echoed in the film as well to a certain extent. There's a lot of that going on in the film. So I didn't really know what to expect, which is a good thing, I think, with a Nicolas Cage film. So I went in kind of fresh, and I must say I was totally surprised by the film. It was not anything like what I was expecting. So that's probably a good thing, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I went in completely blind to this as well, and I absolutely loved it. Like, for me, this is a strong contender for top 10 of the year because I really liked what I saw. I think this is a particularly intense Nick Cage performance, and there's a lot of energy to it that I really enjoyed. So, I mean, yeah, let's just dig in. Like, what did you think of let's start with Nicolas Cage. Obviously, we don't ever get to know his character's name, but he is in a sort of path back to sort of, as I say, re-establishing kind of family life, particularly with his son. What did you think of his character, and obviously how that unravels throughout the film?
Well, he starts off as a mildly desperate character because he's trying to close a deal on his former childhood home, and he's basically been gazumped and somebody's offered 100,000 more for the place. So that puts him on edge at the start, and it pretty much just goes downhill from there.
Yeah.
He starts off as, well, he's there with his son to begin with, and it's the big fancy car and the surfboard, and he's well dressed, and the brown loafers and all this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So yes, so you're introduced to him, and he's this seemingly affluent man, but you kind of get the reality check pretty soon after that he's kind of desperate because he's trying to get some of his past back when he was happier in that sort of place, and he's trying to sort of rebuild his relationship with his son because I don't know if he's divorced, but he's at least separated from his wife, and he's almost portrayed as being this sort of Walter Mitty type character in that it's all a wee bit fantastical, nothing's real, he doesn't come through with promises he's made, it's always big stories about what he's done and what he is doing and all this, and he's just kind of desperate to get it onto sort of a standard track, I would say, get some sort of reality, get a grounding, and he thinks that by getting this house, that's what's going to happen. You see that in some of the wee visions in the film of him standing on the deck looking out over the ocean and everything, and he's thinking that's sort of paradise and stability at the same time. Yeah, and then mental isn't a word I use normally, but yes, it just goes very, very crazy and very strange. But fair play to the man. He's done similar things in the past and he's carried off, and I think he kind of carries it off here as well because he knows that this performance in this film is not rooted in reality. It's something else entirely, so he kind of plays into that in a lot of ways. He's got permission to basically push his performance here to the extreme if he wants. He plays certain elements quite low, but a lot of it is dialed up to 11, to use a well-known phrase.
I think you're so right. I think there's a desperation. First of all, I'm just glad that he wasn't doing an Australian accent because I was a bit worried initially that we were going to get the Nick Cage Neighbours special, but actually, no, he doesn't do that. And there is an explanation as to why. He doesn't sound like that anymore. But yeah, I think that, like, as an actor, I wonder what it's like when your character is so stripped down and reduced and humiliated, and how you sort of keep going with that on a sort of psychological level, because I do think it's a really interesting performance in the sense that when we first meet him, he's got the kind of linen suit and the loafers and the nice car, and obviously he's got the fancy watch that he get given for his 21st, which is a kind of focal point of some plot lines. And by the end of the film, obviously we see a completely different man. So I think this is a really intense, as I say, Nick Cage performance, and a very sort of interesting one in the sense that, yes, it is dialed up to 11, but with this film, it's really hard to know what the truth is. And I think that makes this character so interesting as well, because there's, like, right from the offset, you've got like a really heavy colour saturation in the film, which almost feels like hallucinatory, like throughout. How did the visual style of the film, because for me, I didn't know if this was almost like a dream or something at times. It just felt so, like, how did that work for you?
Yeah, well, in a lot of the film, you see the sort of interstitial scenes where it just focuses on like the bush or like a small animal or rodent or whatever. But then you get this heat haze.
Oh, yeah.
And it's almost like you say, it's almost like a dream, because it's a kind of visual sort of cue that would be used to like fade into a dream almost. So yeah, it's that kind of idea, and I know we're kind of conditioned to it, but yes, like you say, everything is too colourful. It's almost like you're standing at the beach without any sunglasses on because you're squinting all the time and everything's just too bright for you. And that just kind of plays into the whole aspect of the sort of deterioration of the character, that this may or may not be. Like, for such a long time in this film, I didn't know whether this was happening or it wasn't happening, whether it was real, whether the whole thing was real, because he starts off in his car and he's in this nice air-conditioned car and everything, and then that kind of stops happening. The battery stops working. It's an electric car, so therefore the battery eventually goes and everything, all this kind of stuff. But yeah, it felt very much like a dream, and it felt very much like a sort of, it was almost like one of these American independent films from the 60s, where it sort of, it was talking about like sort of drug culture and things like that, and it was all very weird and sort of dreamlike, almost like experimental films. And it kept you on the edge for the whole time because you didn't really know what was going to happen at all.
Yeah, and I definitely think that there's this sort of like, there's a kind of yellow and orange haze over it, which immediately makes you feel sweaty. And then you've got these close-ups of characters who are like sweating, chapped lips. And then you've got even like, there's like scenes of animals sort of swatting away flies, and they just like really, there's like a heat that I feel like, and heat obviously can have a sort of effect on your like cognitive abilities. So there's that element that's brought into it. And then, as I say, this colour saturation cinematography that makes this beautiful Australian coastline feel threatening because, as you say, it's like the colours are so dialed up that it's not this luxurious holiday destination. There's something about it that feels off and sort of uncanny. And I definitely think that plays into this notion of, are we seeing what's actually happening, or is this some sort of like heat-induced fever dream? Which I really like the fact that this film plays with your sense of reality as well, because obviously that allows Nick Cage to sort of, as we said, go a bit batshit. The film also sort of explores, I suppose we call it, toxic masculinity and privilege, sort of like this kind of notion of like localism and us versus them. What did you think of that?
I felt that it was kind of grounded in reality, because you can imagine these sort of communities being like that. Obviously, the whole point of it is that it came from the fact that there was a family that basically ran the whole area. They had all the like properties and businesses and stuff like that. So they were the sort of alpha family, and from that you get this alpha male character in Scully as well. So it's very much, you know, he's in charge, and it's really, it's made out to be like a cult more than anything else. That's what it seems to be, and that's played into with the fact that they have rituals, they have all these onboarding things that they have to do, and there's all sorts of things involved in that, and the way that they dress and the way that they kind of act towards each other is a certain deference towards the leader. But then again, they're a group because they all sit in a circle and do certain chanting and stuff like that, and it's all very, very weird stuff. But yes, very much it's all sort of these hyper alpha males that, to some extent, like the whole community of them, they're all alpha males, but then you've got the sort of the top dog. It's almost like a pack mentality as well, you know. And there was even one point that I saw that two of them were sitting together, two of the group were sitting together, and one of them actually looked as if he was grooming the other one in terms of like picking things out of him. And it was really weird, because obviously that's like sort of like chimpanzee and ape culture that they do that, and that's a deference thing to somebody who's more senior than you. You basically you look after them, you make sure that they're presentable and everything as well. And there was lots of wee bits like that, which I thought it was really good. But what I also liked was, obviously, with a lot of alpha male characters, underneath it they are kind of fragile as well. And there was a couple of like small fight scenes in it, and they weren't really good fighters at any point. And that turned out, and the reason behind that is because they weren't these sort of hardened criminals. It was like the bank manager was one of them. So yeah, he ended up getting like his face all kind of like splattered and everything. And I thought that was really good, because it was more sort of, that went back to reality, rather than if it was this sort of dream sequence, or the whole thing was a dream sequence, then it would have kind of played out a little differently, I thought. But yeah, it was like a sort of an essential element to the film, but it was horrible. You were horrified by the way that these people behaved, and you were just especially when it was the very younger guys, and you were wanting to just go, oh, I'll be you and fuck off, you know, just go away. But there's nowhere to hide, because it was all set in one location. We should say that it was, for the entirety of the film, he was in the car park, which overlooked the beach that he wanted to surf on, and then couldn't. The initial sequence was him and his son trying to go onto the beach, and they were being really respectful, but they were told, no, you're not a local, away you go. Even though it turns out that they knew he was a former local.
I think it's it almost feels like a weird sort of like corporate retreat sort of bullshitty thing, like but as you say, dialed up to 11, like, because they're obviously like Scally's thing is he's going to sort of, you know, bring out these sort of alpha men or alpha male traits in the Bay Boys, and Scally himself is described as a trust fund baby at one point as well. And then you've got that woman with the velour tracksuit who's like, it's great because they keep all the riffraff out. So there is this notion that there's a, you know, a way to behave. And when you do sort of see glimpses of the house that Nick Cage wants to buy, because there's other buyers who are sort of walking around with the real estate agent, you do get a sense, obviously, this is an area that is privileged and is sort of like well-to-do. And I think that like there's all these kind of weird sort of hazing rituals. And then you see there's a scene where they invite all their wives and children down to the beach, and they all look sort of vaguely identical. There's a sort of Stepford Wives thing going on. And it's like the ladies are allowed to come, you know, to bring the cool boxes for the day and, you know, all this sort of thing. So I did think it was just kind of bizarre, like this notion of sort of reclaiming your sort of alpha male, but at the same time there's this kind of undercurrent of violence, which I think you see is it like there's French tourists that try to go on the beach and they beat them up so badly as well, which I think is where the film almost sort of takes a turn, because up until that point you are kind of going, well, are we seeing this? Are we not seeing this? Is this real? But then when those tourists who are nothing to do with like Nick Cage's character, they're just tourists who simply want to be on the beach, when they get beaten up, you're like, oh no, this is a lot more serious than just, you know, frat boys misbehaving or sort of ego boosting each other. This is like, this actually has quite a dark undercurrent to it. And I think that's obviously seen through the surfers' decline. So let's talk about that, because I feel like it was one humiliation after the other, and to the extent where I was like, I cannot take any more of what's happening to this man. Like, it's not happening to me, it's happening to a character. I just thought, how much more shit can you heap on a person? It was unbelievable.
Literal shit.
Literal shit.
Yeah. It was actually done fairly quickly, the sort of degradation of him. So like I said, he started off with his nice air-conditioned car, which then stopped working. As a consequence, his phone stopped working, so he was completely isolated at that point, and it was overly hot, so therefore he was taking, like, he would try and like go into this disgusting bathroom.
Public toilet.
Minging, with the brown water coming out and all that sort of stuff. And then through that, he lost his jacket, he lost his shoes, and he injured himself walking on glass as well. And then the degradation just went from there. The fact that he lost his water bottle. He had this nice sort of executive big water bottle. He lost that. Then he couldn't get water from the waterfront because basically they put a bag of shit on the waterfront as well. And then just to double up on that, they made sure there was a barking dog there as well.
I know.
They would keep him away from it, even if he really wanted to try and get into it. But yes, just with the fact, like I say, because it was so hot, he became like so disheveled so quickly. And he became like the old guy who was living there as well, the old tramp guy who was living in his car and had been living there for years. And he basically almost turned into this guy. And I thought that was like the old guy wasn't real. It was just a sort of figment of his imagination.
That's what I thought as well.
He's going to turn into this character and he's going to become the old bum that lives in the car park in this car. And for a short while he did, because he was actually in the car because his own car got stolen and everything. So I kind of knew what was going to happen because he was going down layers and layers and layers. And like Scally had this conversation with him at one point about, you know, you have to lose everything, you have to lose it all in order to rebuild. And I kind of thought, well, I kind of see where this is going, but it did and it didn't sort of do that. But it was quite incredible to see, and like the desperation in him as well. And like I say, because there's so much, like in terms of like with dehydration, and that can alter what you're thinking about, what you're actually seeing. We're with the surfer at all times, and we're seeing everything as he's seeing it. So we're seeing him basically like going nuts, and that's where the sort of the dream elements come into it as well, because we don't know what's real and what is real because we're with him all the time.
I mean, the scene where he's like licking beer out of a puddle that's like full of cigarettes. And then also, do you know what really got to me? See the scene where this is like full on breakdown mode for Nick Cage, and you know, he's trying to phone, is it his like solicitor or like realtor or whatever, because he's so convinced that this deal could go through. And then he picks up the payphone and it's been cut, and they're all just standing laughing at him. And that lasts for way longer than is comfortable. This notion that there's literally a crowd of people laughing at someone quite clearly in mental distress.
Yeah.
And I just felt so uncomfortable watching that. And then you've got the young guy that runs the coffee van, and he essentially sort of steals his watch in order to pay for like a latte and things like that because his phone won't charge. And I was just like, how much more awful things can you put or can you make happen to this one character? And also that sort of like underlined by, as you've said, this singular location, because there's nowhere for him to go beyond the car park. And it's just, it's claustrophobic in how uncomfortable it is. Like, and this is what I mean about, you know, Nick Cage's performance it may feel over the top to some people, but I actually think it's right on key with everything else that's going on, because there's moments where, as I say, he loses his watch to a barista, and the barista turns around really confidently and he's like, no, this is my watch. I got it for my 21st birthday. And you're going, am I losing my mind watching this? Or is this, you know, and that's why, like you, I thought it was going to turn out that he was originally the homeless man that was in his car. But obviously that is actually quite a different story altogether. How would you say that Julian McMahon's character contributes to this? Because as I say, there's a sense of unease that I just can't get away from when I think of this film. How do you feel like his performance added to that? Because he's not quite doing all of the bad things, because you never really see him sort of getting his hands dirty, but you know he's there.
Yeah, he doesn't need to do any of the bad things because he has his devotees that will do everything for him. He was very interesting. I thought that performance was excellent as well, because it was just in the right side of madness as well, that one. He was obviously, like you say, he's very much a trust fund, an EPO baby, if you like. So he came across as being totally self-assured in everything he was doing, and he could justify everything, although he was kind of careful as well, because there was a wee bit where there was a video of him being interviewed, and he was talking to somebody, and he was saying, yeah, I need to be careful what I'm saying here. So he wasn't stupid in any way. He's a very, very clever guy, and he was almost there kind of taunting the surfer at every turn, because, well, you find out later why he was taunting him, because he knew the surfer when he was a younger man, when he was like a teenager, and what actually shaped the adult version of the surfer from there. So he knew all about that because it was all happened locally on a local beach.
Yeah.
So yeah, I kind of thought it was a portrayal of a character that had rage, but he knew how to control it, and he knew the buttons to press. He knew how to get under people's skin in order to, well, firstly antagonize them and then recruit them from there, because that's what it was all about. It was all part of the show for him. He was able to sit back and just offer advice and just say, I would like this done, and you would have at least 2 or 3 people around him who say, I'll do that, don't worry about it, and they would go out and do that. Because like I say, he never got involved in any of the violence towards the surfer at all. It's always the wee minions. It was always the young guys were doing a lot of the taunting, and then when it was sort of it was almost like a different boss level, you know. There was like one of the bigger guys had to go at him and things like that as well. So yes, it was a tremendous performance, but it was kind of dialed down in a way that you just felt there was a lot more to the menace that he was actually showing on screen.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think he's someone who I would describe as like violently charismatic. Yeah. Like there was an intensity as to how he presented himself. You know, you see examples of like, he has the local police in his pocket, and he is seen as this like, all round, the women in the velour tracksuit, thinks he's an all round good guy because, as I say, he keeps the riffraff out. But the smile and the permatan and the therapy speak that he engages in obviously
Yes.
belies something that is a lot darker and more dangerous. So yeah, I really liked his performance. And also there is a sense that he is sort of unraveling himself, sort of mirroring the Nick Cage character, but just not in a way that's obviously, he's not like living in his car drinking beer off the ground. There's a sort of, his need for control is different, but it's obviously he's trying to keep this group together, and he's obviously trying to recruit, and he knows the surfer's past as well, which as audience or viewers, whatever you want to call it, we don't. So he's got that extra bit of knowledge as well. So I thought he was a really interesting character, and probably quite fun to play, I imagine, if you're dealing with just playing an out and out bastard, you know.
Yeah, I liked the fact there was also a bit of a mirroring there as well, because obviously the surfer spends a lot of his time in his car and in the car park, and he's isolated there, whereas the cult leader is basically living in a shack on the beach.
Yeah.
You never see him anywhere else, and you never see him in anything other than this red sort of toweling
Like a poncho type thing, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's obviously that he lives basically his whole time there. He doesn't move from there, and he holds court there, and that's part of the almost like the compound that they stay in. And in order to keep that safe and pure, they don't let other people onto the beach, because if other people come on, then they'll say to other people to come, and it's like, you know, local beach for local people kind of idea. But even then, you would think that it would only be certain local people that would get to use it.
Oh
It
yeah,
wouldn't just be
like
anybody.
Yeah, you probably have to have like a certain annual income or a certain type of house in order to get anywhere near that beach. I mean, I think it's interesting that both of these films are obviously water-based, but they also deal with a lot of like nostalgia and longing, because obviously the surfer has a nostalgia for his childhood that he's obviously trying to rekindle with his own son by buying that house. How did you feel that the surfer's storyline then, and this notion of his childhood, how do you feel that sort of played out? Did you, because again, I feel like this is a film that could have gone quite literally any which way, and like you, I thought it was going to go down a particular route where he'd imagined like the homeless guy. How did you feel that the film sort of wraps itself up when we finally get to understand why he's come back and why he has this desire to reclaim his childhood home?
Yeah, well, it's a childhood trauma that basically informs the whole of his adult life, and he says that himself. Not in so many words. He doesn't actually explicitly say why he's doing that, but at every turn, when he's speaking to his realtor and when he's speaking to the estate agent that comes around and everything, he says, all I've done is work for this. I've worked towards this moment. That's all I have done. And that's obviously been to the detriment of his family life, because his wife, who speaks to on the phone, basically says, you don't care about anything, you're just obsessed about it. And that's all it is, it's an obsession. And the fact that that obsession is realised in the madness that ensues partly within his own mind, and partly by the fact that he's being terrorised by these people. The fact that all comes together in the last 5-10 minutes of the film, I think it kind of works, but you would be forgiven for thinking that this film doesn't really have much of a story at all. It seems to be very, there's if you actually looked at it on paper, you would think there's actually not much of a story here. Man goes to the beach, man goes mad, you know. So there's really not that much depth to it, but it's the journey. Well, it's the journey rather than the destination. It's how he gets to that place. So yeah, I kind of think that it works well in that regard. It wasn't quite what I was expecting towards the end of it, basically because, as you say, it could go in any number of ways. You really don't know what's going to happen. It could quite easily have him waking up in his car after being asleep for 20 minutes. Yeah. You just don't know what's going to happen in this film. You don't know really anything. And I think that's to the benefit of the film more than anything else. Yeah,
and to be honest with you, it does give us an ending where we see Nicolas Cage shoving a dead rat in a man's mouth, which is up there with like top tier cinema, has to be. Yeah. It was a nice callback for the rat there, yes. Even the fact that when he killed the rat was in the car, and he didn't just take one go at hitting it against the outside of the car. I know, yeah. That was the violence in this is like, and the thing is, it's such unexpected violence, so it is things like that that really make you go, what the fuck is going on here? Like, it's just there's no subtlety about it. But it's interesting that you touched on obsession there, because that was one of the other things that I thought was quite interesting, and also another way in which Scally and the surfer sort of mirror each other. So Scally has this obsession with keeping the beach, as you see, sort of pure and for locals, and he has this thing where he wants to get rid of soft men, and that's what's kind of driving him. That's his obsession, and obviously the surfer has his own kind of obsession. So I did think that was a kind of neat suggestion that the characters are not that far apart from each other in terms of their personal motivations. It's just that they're obviously executing things in a very, very different way. Did you pick up on that as well? Because I know they're obviously meant to be like antagonists and protagonists, but they're actually probably more similar than
in a lot of ways they are very much the same, so you can't really categorize them as protagonists, antagonists, because they both got things that are good about them, both got things that are really bad, more bad than good, I would say, in both of them. So it's difficult to discern between the two. It's the two sides of the coin more than anything else. And like you mentioned before, there's a nostalgia aspect to all this. They're both looking for a time where it was better for them. So obviously for Scally, it's, you know, the male being in charge, the white male being in charge of being noticed.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's all very much white men involved in this. And for the surfer, it's a time before he became obsessed with getting this house back. You know, a simpler time when he was out on the water and he was surfing and he had seemingly quite a nice life. But obviously there was other things going on in his seemingly quite nice life that he wasn't aware of, to do with his father. So they're both trying to clutch at something that's just not there anymore, and they're both trying their hardest to do that. And because of that, they are very similar. There's no traditional good guy, bad guy here. It's just like sort of bad guy and worse guy, if you like.
Yeah, definitely. I would say that the pacing is really good in the film as well. Like, I think it's a really tight film, and because of all of the stuff that's going on, and because you're not quite sure what's happening, I think it runs really tight. Would you agree with that?
This film could run for 3 hours and it would still be regarded as a tight film, because it's a descent into madness. So it's just how far you take that character into madness. Now it's 100 minutes long,
something like that,
which is probably just about right. But if there was an extra 20-30 minutes of Nicolas Cage going nuts here, then exactly. Even spending a bit more time in the company of the Scally and his crew, which is not really the reason behind the film actually existing. They are side characters with regards to the surfer is the main character. Like I say, he's there most of the time, but spending more time as he degrades and he kind of losing his humanity and everything, I'd be quite happy with that. So I think the pacing really worked. Because in this type of film, you're not sure what is actually filler and what is actually the real story. And like I said, because there's not much of a story, it gives it a license to do all sorts of weird things. And because they're using certain like dreamlike sequences and using the elements to sort of heighten everything, then pacing kind of goes out the window. You're just kind of getting thrown these images and these scenes, and you just accept it because it's all part of the journey with this one. It's rather than, you know, like there's no 3-act structure to this, put it that way.
Yeah, because you're not even sure like which of the cutaways are going to come back and be relevant like at different points in the film, or if what you're seeing is a flashback, a flash forward. Is it because it is quite loose with time and with structure, actually, as you say. There's not really like a through plot line here. It is, you know, we are witnessing a descent into madness, and that obviously doesn't have a structure either. But yeah, I just thought you're so right. If it had run for 3 hours, I would have sat and watched it as well. Although I do feel like maybe my discomfort would have increased significantly, because given that it was only an hour and 40 minutes and there were so many moments where I felt like, oh God, I don't know if I can watch this. Maybe 3 hours would probably push me to my own limit. Is there anything else in the film that you'd like to chat about?
There wasn't very much in terms of like music or anything like that. It was all more soundscapey rather than actual music, but I felt that worked particularly well because it was always kind of nicely there in the background, just heightening things, and it did in such a subtle way that you didn't really notice it unless you were specifically like focused on it. It just added to the tension and the fact that things were going rapidly downhill. Also, the cinematography in it. Obviously, it was set in a beach location and also a car park, but for an awful lot of the time, it was Nicolas Cage, just a headshot a lot of the time. And it played into the fact that he does these sort of offbeat roles so well. He knows how to compose the character and how to get that across, the sort of desperation in the eyes. There was a lot of emphasis on smacking of lips as well, I noticed.
And his lips were so dry, and there was almost it was almost kind of spaghetti western at times, I felt, with the close-ups of like the eyes and the teeth and all that, and you were really getting a sense of these characters in a sort of like almost like in a B-movie type of style, but in a way that definitely worked for this film. Yeah,
and it wasn't just him, like say the peroxide blonde. There was a shot of her smacking her lips, and Scally as well. So, and the old tramp as well, he was doing that because obviously they were all parched and were thirsty and stuff. But it was the whole the sound that makes is quite horrible at times. It can be, it's because it obviously was amplified and it was brought right up into the sound mix and everything. So you really got this smack of the lips, and you think, oh, it's not good. But
this isn't like gentle waves lapping on the Australian shoreline. This is like that kind of visceral sort of like human body sounds, and as I say, the kind of spaghetti western sort of close-ups as well. It's definitely, I feel like it's a really unusual film, and I feel like it's going to maybe divide audiences a wee bit. I think some people, you're either going to really like this or really hate this. What can I ask? What camp did you fall into?
I really liked this film. I thought it was great. I enjoyed it from start to finish, pretty much because I didn't know what to expect, which is a standard response when you talk about the Nick Cage filmography. If you like. It is almost a genre at times now. But yes, I thought that was it was really, really good. It's not for everybody. A lot of people will switch this film off after maybe about 10 or 15 minutes and say this is a big pile of poo. But I really enjoyed it, and I would recommend it to people who are open to the variety of Nick Cage fare that is out there.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I really like this film. As I say, for me, it's easily top 10 of the year material, but I can see a lot of people having problems with it from maybe the violence perspective, or the fact that, as you say, kind of nothing really happens. There isn't really much of so that might make people feel a bit sort of turned off by it. But no, I absolutely loved it, and I believe it is still in UK cinemas. So if you're going to catch it, I would encourage you to do so. It's definitely one it'll get you talking and thinking afterwards, which I think is always a hallmark of sort of good cinema, if you're sort of thinking about it and picking it apart for a wee while afterwards. Yeah,
it was quite interesting as well that Nick Cage is afraid of sharks. Yeah, he agreed.
Is he?
Where he was in the water for a certain length of time as well. So, yes. Yeah.
Good for him. If it was me, there's no way I'd be going near bodies of open water like that, especially in a film called The Surfer, where you'd maybe assume that your character was actively surfing quite a lot, which he obviously isn't in this film. That's the whole point. He can't go on the beach. But yeah, imagine signing up for that and then going, but wait a minute, Australia's full of sharks.
And everything else, obviously.
I know, definitely a country that if Gillian McMahon doesn't get to you, there's all types of species of God knows what that'll get to you first.
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
So that concludes our discussion of The Ballad of Wallis Island and The Surfer. If you have any thoughts on either of these films, you can always let us know on all of the usual social channels, including Blue Sky. We are at Moviescramble. And if you want to drop John an email, you can find him podcast@moviescramble.co.uk. And what we would dearly love more than anything else is for you to leave us a review on any your podcasting platforms of choice. 5 stars only, obviously. We're not here for the 1 star. We're not The Guardian. But on our next episode, we're going to be continuing our 1995 retrospective. So tune in for that. Until next time, it is bye from me.
Bye.